meeting is being recorded.
Yes, it is. Okay, so welcome everyone. Glad that we're going to start a reading of actual Hamilton writings as of tonight. Pascal sent me the PDF of report on the subject of manufacturers. We were trying to agonize a little bit over which particular report by Hamilton would be the most expedient to read after having worked through LaRouche's In Defense of Alexander Hamilton over the past 2 weeks. And we came to the realization that the report on the subject of manufacturers, which was composed at the end of 1791, I believe, was probably the wisest thing to do because, well, it really does get at the essence and kernel and spirit of the American system when the term is used. It's not so much the national bank, though it is that. It's not so much the public credit, though it is that too as a component. It's not so much the idea of simply directing the economy in one direction or another, though those are components, but rather it's a certain spirit of the productive powers of labor, the idea of the mind as the source of value that has to animate the behavior of all of the mechanisms that you choose to utilize in battle, both against the force of absolute evil. I mean, you're dealing with when people read about economics, they're often given a sort of apolitical fallacy of what the battle over economic theories is, as if we're in an open playing field and all people are equally just trying to figure things out and are equally just trying to come up with the best theory of pricing, of figuring out value. But the reality is that there are political agendas, there are intentions, aka conspiracies, that utilize political power and instruments, both public and private, in order to destroy the good. That's a part of life. And nobody knew that better than the founding fathers, who risked so much to create a new type of society that had never really been actualized before. Alexander Hamilton, being a key figure in that process, who rose to prominence early on as a young man. His talents were discovered early on by networks of Ben Franklin. He became George Washington's trusted aide-de-camp. He led battles on the front lines as well. He wasn't just somebody in an ivory tower, just sort of sitting in a general's office from the safety of some office, but rather he was on the front lines. I'm just gonna hit some mute bars there. I got people coming on here. 1 second. But he was really in the thick of it. And once the revolution was a success politically in 1783 and the Peace of Paris was signed, we know that the fight was not over. It was really just beginning in a certain way, because at that point, the US still didn't really have any type of economic independence. If anything, they were in a terrible situation, right? The war debts incurred over 6 years of fighting were astronomical. Each state had their own peculiar forms of banking. There was no harmonization amongst the 13 colonies. There was unpayable debts. There was a very small array of industry. There was some industrial activity in the north, but not very much. Most of the country was still reliant upon cash cropping, agrarian exports to foreign markets, mostly bought up by the British. And most importantly, there was no ability to really execute tax collection within the states, or bounties, protective tariffs. You couldn't really collect duties on imported goods coming in, often controlled by things like the British East India Company, British enterprises that were more than happy to dump cheap goods to destroy and undercut local industries, manufacturing, agriculture that was trying to breathe and come to life, especially industries. So that was part of the battle. And by, I think, the 1786 period, the US currency had been devaluated, but 40-fold. There was a massive inflation. I think by 1787, there was like 100-fold inflation. So nobody really had any faith internationally or even within the United States of the value of the US dollar. Everyone thought that it was only a matter of time before the US, being as weak as it was and incapable of doing anything as a nation, would be reabsorbed back into the empire. And especially the British imperialists, who were embedded within the United States, understood that very much too. And you did have people like Aaron Burr, who we all looked at, who are waiting in the wings, acting like patriots on the surface, but really just waiting to sabotage and destroy the US from within on behalf of their handlers way overseas in the British colonial office. So Alexander Hamilton was instrumental in solving a lot of these problems. We've talked about in the previous weeks of figuring out a way to consolidate the debt of the states into a new federal debt, to get rid of the local currencies, the local banks, because you had so many currencies. You had a lot of counterfeiting. And you didn't have any free trade amongst the states even. You had states that were fighting against their neighboring states for scraps of a diminishing return of a pie. So you with that type of an idea of a consolidated nation that had a federal debt that was converted into a real productive credit that could then be emitted in the form of new types of credit emissions for building big projects, you were able to then also have a free trade occurring within the states as long as you had a real nation, right? Where everybody was unified under a common theme and objective of the general welfare, of increasing the power of the people and the ability for that nation to self-direct economically. So Hamilton, without Hamilton, none of this would have happened. That in my mind is clear. I think as we go through the report on the subject of manufacturers and Hamilton's real case that was being made against many voices who are saying we don't need manufacturing. People like Jefferson were saying that, no, if anything, if you allow manufacturing, you become decadent, you become corrupt. We don't need that. We're pure. We're farmers. We don't need to have the dirtiness of industrial civilization. And there's quotes by Jefferson, there's actions, there's policies that really reflect that. And Hamilton and Washington sided with him on this point, obviously rejected that thesis and made the point that no, people, if anything, are going to be a lot smarter if you actually have an industrial civilization. You're going to have a lot more opportunities to think creatively, to make new discoveries that will also impact in a beneficial way your farming sector as well, because you're going to have new tractors, new machinery that can be brought online, and there's going to be a feedback between agriculture and industry that will benefit everybody. So let's just get the ball rolling on this. If people want to kick in, stop, ask a question at any time, please do. This is a rather advanced form of the English language that even I'm not accustomed to necessarily reading, and don't feel bad if you're not catching every idea that's being developed. So let me just open up here. Where is it? Pascal sent the PDF, if I could just find it. Okay, all right, second. Sorry, it's slow, a little slow here. There we go. Can everyone see the screen?
I also put the link to the website, the founders online website. It's in the chat box. So if ever you want to follow it, make it.
Can you zoom slightly?
Yes. Is that better? Is that doing the job?
Oh yeah, that's much better now.
Okay, and like Pascal said, he sent the link in the chat box to a website that has all of, or much of Hamilton's writings and many other founding fathers as well. Very useful resource to have. We just need a reader today who has to read slowly. Who would like to, Declan, would you like to give it a shot?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
Cool.
All right. Let's see, where should I start? Alexander Hamilton's final version of the report on the subject of manufacturers. The Secretary of the Treasury, in obedience to the order of ye House of Representatives of the 15th day of January, 1719, has applied his attention as early and period as his other duties would permit to the subject of manufacturers, and particularly to the means of promoting such as will tend to render the United States independent of foreign nations for military and other essential supplies, and he thereupon respectfully submits the following report. The expediency of encouraging manufacturers in the United States, which was not long since deemed very questionable, appears at this time to be pretty generally admitted. The embarrassments which have obstructed the progress of our external trade have led to serious reflections on the necessity of enlarging the sphere of our domestic commerce. The restrictive regulations, which the foreign markets abridge the vent of the increasing surplus of our agricultural produce, serve to beget an earnest desire that a more extensive demand for that surplus may be created at home. And the complete success, which has rewarded manufacturing enterprise in some valuable branches, conspiring the promising symptoms which attend some less mature essays. In others, justify a hope that the obstacles of the growth of this species of industry are less formidable than they were apprehended to be. And that is not difficult to find in its further extension. A full indemnification for any external disadvantages which are or may be experienced, as well as an accession of resources favorable to national independence and safety. Matt, you muted.
Yeah, Pascal, for these footnotes, 125, 126, do you know if there's like actual useful content being referred? I don't want to go down and lose my spot.
Oh yeah. 1 sec. I could try to follow with the footnotes. Let me just check right now.
Only if it's really useful. If it's something academic or dry, don't worry about it.
Yeah, right now. No, I don't see. Yeah, it's like commentaries. Might be interesting when we get a bit further, but no, I think it's not footnotes that were in the original document, so I don't think we need to necessarily go through that.
Okay. All right.
All right. There still are, nevertheless, respectable patrons of opinions unfriendly to the encouragement of manufacturers. The following are substantially the arguments by which these opinions are defended. In every country, says those who entertain them, agriculture is the most beneficial and productive object of human industry. This position generally, if not universally true, applies with peculiar emphasis to the United States on account of the immense tracts of fertile territory, uninhabited and unimproved. Nothing can afford so advantageous an employment for capital and labor as the conversion of this extensive wilderness into cultivated farms. Nothing equally with this can contribute to the population, strength, and real riches of the country. To endeavor, by the extraordinary patronage of government, to accelerate the growth of manufacturers is, in fact, to endeavor, by force and art, to transfer the natural current of industry from a more to a less beneficial channel. Whatever has such a tendency must necessarily be unwise. Indeed, it can hardly ever be wise in a government to attempt to give a direction to the industry of its citizens. This, under the quick-sighted guidance of private interest, will, if left to itself, infallibly find its own way to the most profitable employment. And 'tis by such employment that the public prosperity will be most effectually promoted. To leave industry to itself, therefore, is, in almost every case, the soundest as well as the simplest policy.
Okay, just quick here. I'm just perusing the footnotes of where these two quotes are coming from, including the third. And they are very big footnotes, but it's pretty, I would say pretty important. Maybe we should read all three of the quotes. Read the next quote.
The Wealth of Nation quotes?
Well, that's the thing. Keep in mind, because he's directly taking aim at Adam Smith, and they make that very clear in the footnotes that it's the physiocratic school and Adam Smith who are making the argument that America should not have industry, should just stay agrarian because that's where you can get the most money. And he's like directly torpedoing that specifically, which Wealth of Nations was also published in 1776, right? Not a political coincidence either. So maybe after the next quote, just read the first of the three footnotes.
Okay.
Okay.
You're gonna
I
scroll.
can read maybe the footnotes. Is it 127 to 128 and
Yeah.
9?
You know what? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'll read that when you're done.
Okay. Sorry.
Because there also seems to be another quote under that, so there seems to be 4 quotes.
Oh, there is.
Am I
Okay. All right.
correct?
Read the quotes. Okay. Just go for all the quotes.
Okay.
130.
Mhm.
All right. This policy is not only recommended to the United States by considerations which affect all nations, it is in a manner dictated to them by the imperious force of a very peculiar situation. The smallness of their population compared with their territory, the constant allurements to immigration from the settled to the unsettled parts of the country, the facility with which the less independent condition of an artisan can be exchanged for the more independent condition of a farmer, these and similar causes conspire to produce, and for a length of time must continue to occasion, a scarcity of hand for manufacturing occupation and dearness of labor generally. To these disadvantages for the prosecution of manufacturers, the deficiency of pecuniary capital being added, the prospect of a successful competition with the manufacturers of Europe must be regarded as little less than desperate. Extensive manufacturers can only be the offspring of a redundant, at least of a full population. Till the latter small characteristics characterize the situation of this country, 'tis vain to hope for the former.
Yeah, so it's
If
only
co-
when our population is completely full and when the population is really big and huge, then you can have manufacturers, because manufacturers only exist for a society which is really developed. So wait till you're developed and then have manufacturing. See,
Sounds like some sort of catch-22 type thing,
yeah.
where you're like, that's what you need to develop.
Well, and the sort of thing is used even today in the context. I've heard people actually argue for Africa that no, they don't need the type of advanced infrastructure that we have because they're not an advanced first world nation like we are. And when they become that, then they can have sanitation, nuclear power, other things. But let's just wait till they get there and then they'll have that infrastructure. Well, I mean, how how to never let anybody develop ever.
I wonder who thought up that idea.
Not a new idea.
Oh, it's worse.
Oh, what are they?
Doing organizing on Africa, it's you get the typical response. Oh, they're happy the way they are.
Oh, yeah. Then you
But
can,
of course, the slave masters all said the same thing. They're happy the way they are.
right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty sick.
All right. If contrary to the natural course of things, an unseasonable and premature spring can be given to certain fabrics by heavy duties, prohibitions, bounties, or by other forced expedients. This will only be to sacrifice the interests of the community to those particular classes. Besides the misdirection of labor, a virtual monopoly will be given to the persons employed on such fabrics, and an enhancement of price, the inevitable consequence of every monopoly, must be defrayed at the expense of the other parts of the society. It is far preferable that those persons should be engaged in the cultivation of the earth, and that we should procure in exchange for its productions and commodities with which foreigners are able to supply us in greater perfection and upon better terms.
Okay, you guys catch that last sophistry?
I'll read the footnotes. Maybe it's gonna dawn on people if it hasn't. So I'll go back to the 127. So 127, the views expressed in this paragraph, like similar statements later in the report, in which Hamilton outlines a physiocratic approach to the subject under discussion. That is, Hamilton is not a physiocrat, but he's bringing in their argument. What is their view of economics and how it should be done? So that's what we just read. So the first quote. The physiocratic approach to the subject under discussion had been expounded by physiocratic economists not only on the continent but in England. Hamilton's notes, drafts, or finished writings do not indicate, however, that he had read the works, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not really, he had read, I'm pretty sure. There's little doubt that Hamilton made use of Adam Smith's discussion of physiocratic views. Well, see,
I guess,
I don't
yeah,
really,
I hear what you're saying.
these footnotes are not really that good. You know,
Yeah.
it's just put in doubt, like, oh, Hamilton talks about Adam Smith, but obviously you never read him.
Well, no, but he's saying that he did read Smith. He's saying they're saying
Yeah.
they're making the claim that he didn't read the physiocratic thinkers, but they're saying that he did read Smith.
But he knew about them, you know.
Yeah.
It's not like, anyway.
But this is not slanderous. This is true. I mean, and what is good, you don't have to read it all. It's true. It's a bit much, but that
Yeah,
they're just making it clear that it is Smith, but also Necker that they're bringing in.
Yeah, a bit further, yeah.
Yeah, the finance minister of France who sabotaged the French Revolution. I find that interesting. But the fact that he was really taking aim at Adam Smith, who many people today believe is the inspiration for the American system and the American Revolution, I think is important. A lot of people miss that.
Yeah, I would just add, because a lot of like even, you know, the critiques and the ones that are actually seemingly pro Hamilton, they tend to bring in the British system as like an example, something that Hamilton was looking towards, but really, like, he obviously knew about the Bank of England, but that's not what he wanted to do with the national bank. And it's pretty clear that, you know, attacking the physiocrats, which were more the economists on the land, in the continent, like, you know, in France, that Smith had studied to write The Wealth of Nation. That's what he based his Wealth of Nation on the physiocrats, on these guys, who were really like, they were kind of like mathematicians. They were just making tables and tables about how much do we have grain, how much do we have this, how much do we have that, and trying to put a formula together to prove like their point, creating a theory of how it works. And but Hamilton is not, that's not what he's going to do in this paper on the manufacturing. You're going to see that he's going to be developing not a mathematical idea, but really a noetic concept, a real principle of how the mind organizes nature and how we can make the production increase to benefit the general welfare, to benefit the whole nation and even other nations, but to make it independent from other nations too, that as what he said in the first paragraph, actually. So he knew about Colbert, he knew about Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who was a minister of the King of France, the minister of everything in a sense at the time, who really was big on manufacturing. He really brought France forward. So that's why I was making the point. If he knew about Colbert, I mean, he probably knew about the physiocrats, and he understood the difference between the two. So maybe it wasn't written in his notes, but okay.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think when you look at the quotes that they selected from Adam Smith here, just to get across Smith's support of the physiocratic view, it is very clear that these are the things that Hamilton was directing his attention directly to, like where they say here in North America, this is Smith, Wealth of Nations. In North America, the purchase and improvement of uncultivated land is the most profitable employment of the smallest as well as the greatest capitals. And then he says, compare the slope. And this, so again, Smith is really pushing for agrarianism, saying you could make more money doing that. And then he says, again, in another section of Wealth of Nations, compare the slow progress of those European countries of which the wealth depends very much on their commerce and manufactures. So those who have in Europe commerce and based on manufacturing, they have slow monetary returns, slow growth. But compare that with the rapid advances of our North American colonies, of which the wealth is founded altogether in agriculture. Through the greater part of Europe, the number of inhabitants is not supposed to double in less than 500 years. In several of our North American colonies, it is found to double in 20 or 5 and 20 years. So again, people say that Smith is for manufacturing. I've heard of many people say that, but the political motive, if you look at how he's deploying his arguments in the world that Smith actually lives in, he's directly taking aim saying that, no, you're going to grow faster if you just don't have industry and you just do agriculture. You'll make more money, your population will grow more. And so he's making the argument too that all of the other European countries, not Britain, should also not have industry too. They should also make like the US underdeveloped farmers as well. And so there's so many layers of fallacy. And they also make the point that Necker, again, who's working with the British Empire to sabotage the French, like Smith, summarized the physiocrats. Thus, in an effort to refute the critics of Colbert's policies, Necker paraphrased the physiocratic ideas as follows. Mais dit-on, il n'a pas permis dans tous les temps? What?
Les temps, in all times.
Oh, can you read that and tell us what it means?
OK. Mais, dit-on, il n'a pas permis dans tous les temps la sortie des blés, sans mesure et sans limite. Il n'a donc pas senti que la liberté est l'âme du commerce. Il n'a donc pas connu les effets invincibles de la concurrence. Il n'a donc pas aperçu la puissance de l'intérêt personnel. So Necker is saying that basically it's all about individual interests and freedom of trade, freedom of commerce, and competition.
Right. Which is what was destroying France economically when they had signed, he signed a free trade agreement with Britain, which resulted in a mass famine where people didn't have bread. And that scarcity was used by the British Empire and their assets, they're in the deep state of France, to get the mob to basically just turn into a chaos machine, right, of the Jacobin bloody terror. And that's what subverted the whole Ben Franklin operation in France. And Necker played a key role by bringing in Smith's theories in that. So I thought that was pretty good too. But just like situated in real political history.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This mode of reasoning is founded upon facts and principles, which have certainly respectable pretensions. If it had governed the conduct of nations more generally than it has done, there is room to suppose that it might have carried them faster to prosperity and greatness than they have attained, by the pursuit of maxims too widely opposite. Most general theories, however, admit of numerous exceptions, and there are a few, if any, of the political kind, which do not blend a considerable position of error with the truths they inculcate. In order to an accurate judgment, how far that which has been just stated ought to be deemed liable to a similar imputation, it is necessary to advert carefully into the considerations which plead in favor of manufacturers, and which appear to recommend the special and positive encouragement of them in certain cases and under certain reasonable limitations. It ought readily to be conceded that the cultivation of the earth, as primary and most certain source of national supply, as the immediate and chief source of subsistence to man, as the principal source of those materials which constitute the nutriment of other kinds of labor, as including a state most favorable to the freedom and independence of the human mind, one perhaps most conducive of the multiplication of the human species, has intrinsically a strong claim to preeminence over every other kind of industry. But that it has a title to anything like a exclusive predilection in any country ought to be admitted with great caution. That it is even more productive than every other branch of industry requires more evidence than has yet been given in support of position. That its real interests, precious and important as without, and the help of exaggeration, they truly are, will be advanced rather than injured by the due encouragement of manufacturers, may, as it believed, be satisfactorily demonstrated. And it is also believed that the expediency of such encouragement in a general view may be shown to be recommended by the most cogent and persuasive motives of national policy. It has been maintained that agriculture is not only the most productive, but the only productive species of industry. The reality of the suggestion, either aspect has, however, not been verified by any accurate detail of facts and calculations, and the general arguments which are adduced to prove it are rather subtle and paradoxical than solid or convincing. Those which maintain its exclusiveness and exclusive protectiveness are to this effect. Labor bestowed upon the cultivation of land produces enough not only to replace all the necessary expenses incurred in the business and to maintain the persons who are employed in it, but to afford, together with the ordinary profit of the stock or capital of the farmer, a net surplus or rent for the landlord or proprietor of the soil. But the labor of artificers does nothing more than replace the stock which employs them, or which furnishes tools, and wages, and yield the ordinary profit upon that stock. It yields nothing equivalent to the rent of land, neither does it add anything to the total value of the whole annual produce of the land and labor of the country. The additional value given to those parts of the produce of land which are wrought into manufacturers is counterbalanced by the value of those other parts that produce which are consumed by the manufacturers. It can therefore only be by saving or parsimony, not by the positive productiveness of their labor, that the classes of artificers can in any degree augment the revenue of the society.
Pascal, I'm just curious, is that an interesting 132 footnote or no?
By the way, does anyone know what an artificer is? It's definitely a term that's fallen out of use.
You want to give your definition of it, or the concept of what an artificer is? True.
Go ahead.
No, I don't know. That's why I'd asked. Does
Oh.
anybody know what? Because like I said, nobody says that word anymore.
Right. It's a manufacturer. It's somebody that works in manufacturers that creates, that uses the arts, of the crafts. So it's, it's an art.
Well, basically, the only person that would have existed then would be like a blacksmith.
Yeah, that's part of it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there were people who were technicians, like people making watches, for example. Because when you have a strange word in English, most of the time it comes from French. And activiste from French, activiste means something that is contrived, that is fabricated.
Mm. Is it related to artificial or art?
Yes, but in the old meaning of the word activist, it doesn't mean, because artificial nowadays means contrived in the bad sense of the word.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, but in the old sense of the word, it simply means something created by the human mind.
Yeah. So here you would be talking about textile manufacturers.
Exactly.
No, that would be a craftsman.
I think in this context, though, he's referring to specifically manufacturing of a broader sense. When he says artificers, I think he means anybody who manufactures.
Exactly.
He's not anybody who's not a farmer in the full spectrum.
I think that.
Yeah, the old use.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Checking just to make sure that we're on the right track. I was looking at the I think it's the Cambridge dictionary. So the old use of artificer is as a skilled craftsman.
Okay.
Someone who makes things, basically.
Who make things. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and so the argument.
Yeah, maybe we were
What's that?
thinking too much about manufacturing in terms of when it was developed as like machine tools, just basically individual craftsmen, basically practicing their trade and then having our students basically learning under them and then passing it on.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because that's the way blacksmiths always acted. They had their apprentices. You basically pass that skill and knowledge.
yeah. Most you're a bit choppy. You're a bit choppy, Drew, coming in and out. Drew, you're on mute now, just so you know. But
Okay, well, that's it.
still-
I'm on
Yeah.
hot point right now, so my I don't know, my internet's not that good.
Yeah, it's rough, man. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But the idea, yeah, that you have an antagonism between the farming sector and the productive, like any type of industrial or any type of artificer, let's use that word, that these two sectors are naturally antagonistic, is a real effort to get the nation to go to really be at odds with itself. And so, yeah, the arguments that he's addressing are people who say, no, you can make more money. The capital of the farmer, if you just stick with land, you're going to be able to, that land will just keep on producing. You're going to be able to extract rents, more money. You're going to be able to sell your goods. It'll supply your overhead. It'll be great. But if you just have, like, if you have people who work with machines and no, I mean, they don't produce as much profit. They're just a lag on society. You don't want that. It's better if you just get everybody onto the fields.
Yeah, I would
Sounds like
just
a Hallmark movie.
add. Oh, sorry.
Nothing. I was just quipping.
Okay. I was just gonna add that, at the time, even you could look at it like even further in the 19th century, and it took a long time before the population, the agrarian or agricultural, the parts in terms of division, it took a long time before cities had more people than the farmlands. So it's really in the late 19th century really, like, when we call it, the Industrial Revolution. So it's later on really that there's going to be this migration where people are going to live in cities much more than on the farmland. Whereas at the time that Hamilton is writing this report on manufacture, he's really trying to, promote the idea that actually, even if it's not everybody that's using manufacturing products, we should actually get better at it. That's what he's saying. We should make our own. We should get better at it, and it's going to get people to become better on their own, because they're going to use their minds. They're going to create stuff that never existed before. So sure, he's not against farming. He's really not against farming, but he's saying we can actually do better even for farming. We can actually create new tools that are going to benefit the farmers,
right,
by applying our time and our minds to create new stuff in manufacturers.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that LaRouche wrote his paper in 1987 inspired by this paper. But we go back to the idea of integrated economy.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
Okay.
that answers this fallacy.
To this, it has been answered that inasmuch as it is acknowledged that manufacturing labor reproduces a value equal to that which is expended or consumed in carrying it on, and continues in existence the original stock or capital employed, it ought on that account alone to escape being considered as wholly unproductive. That though it should be admitted, as alleged, that the consumption of the produce of the soil by the classes of artificers or manufacturers is exactly equal to the value added by their labor to the materials upon which it is exerted. Yet it would not thence follow that it added nothing to the revenue of society, or to the aggregate value of the annual produce of its land and labor. In the consumption for any given period amounted to a given sum, and the increased value of the produce manufactured in the same period to the like sum, the total amount of the consumption and production during that period will be equal to the two sums, and consequently double the value of the agricultural produce consumed. And though the increment of value produced by the classes of artificers should at no time exceed the value of the produce of the land consumed by them, yet there would be at every moment, in consequence of their labor, a greater value of goods in the market than would exist independent of it. 2. That the position that artificers can augment the revenue of the society only by parsimony is true in no other sense than in one which is equally applicable to husbandmen or cultivators. It may be alike affirmed of all these classes, that the fund acquired by their labor and destined for their support is not, in an ordinary way, more than equal to it. And hence it will follow that augmentations of the wealth or capital of the community, except in the instances of some extraordinary dexterity or skill, can only produce, with respect to any of them, from the savings of the most thrifty and parsimonious.
I think here, so yeah, parsimony probably means savings, right? Like
Yeah, thrifting, right?
thrifting. Okay.
Another French word, parsimony.
Yeah, we took a lot. I mean, that one didn't quite hang on there in the English language. We shook it off, but
Yeah, yeah. But now in French, I don't know why, but with time, a word tend to drift to a negative meaning, because now parsimonieux means someone who is almost a miser.
like cheap, stingy. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the logic that the artificer only makes revenue through savings rather than increasing production. He's like, well, kind of in some way, but that's the same kind of argument could be applied also to the husbandman as well, or the farmer. It's a bit of a fallacy to try to make it seem as though that's only a type of profit that can be gotten from from manufacturing. So that's a half.
I would like to argue that here I agree with you that it has been used by the British as a fig leaf, okay, to prevent industrialization. However, it's a very old mentality stating that the only true source of riches or wealth is from agriculture, okay? But it's an old mentality from the Roman Empire, for example, that only lands are the true source of revenue, or even during the Chinese Empire times, till the 17th century, it was a mentality. So I would say that something could be true for a very long time, but when you have a quantum leap in technology, it takes a certain time of adaptation for the new mentality to be perceived as nobler than the old noble mentality. In terms of context to allow people to develop more their mind.
Yeah, there's definitely that lag for sure. I mean, the Industrial Revolution was just, I mean, this is a brand new thing. It hadn't really even started taking off yet fully. So the idea of how industries transformed the productive processes as a whole economically was, I mean, underdeveloped. So there's a lag. But at the same measure too, when you read Thomas More or Erasmus, especially Thomas More, he's making a case back in like the 1513 period for the need for manufacturing as well. So it's not like the idea wasn't understood by the minds of many really advanced thinkers, even 200-300 years before this writing. But there was a fight over keeping society politically stuck in feudal type of ways of modalities to better be controlled. So that there's that political agenda aspect as well, even before Britain became the center of sort of the empire.
Yeah, absolutely. But well, for a very long time, the landlords control people because they own the lands. Okay, and I'm sorry to quote Henry Kissinger in this group, but this guy is famous for having stated that if you control the food, you control the people. So if you control the land, you control the food.
Sure, absolutely.
Are you sure you were not quoting Bill Gates?
Oh, no. I don't want to stoop myself so low. I will stop at Henry Kissinger. At least it's Dr. Kissinger.
Well, maybe he stole that term like he did the software for Microsoft.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shadow of a shadow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, by
At
the
the
way,
end-
Matt,
Yes, Choppy Drew.
I basically put together a timeline of the whole camera-less school of Europe and America. How do I share something like that?
In the chat box. Somewhere on Zoom here, you'll find chat. And when that opens, you could just share things to the group. Would very much like to see that. That's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Numero trois.
That number 3, that the annual produce of the land and labor of a country can only be increased in 2 ways: by some improvement in the productive powers of the useful labor which actually exists within it, or by some increase in the quantity of such labor. That with regard to the first, the labor of artificers being capable of greater subdivision and simplicity of operation than that of cultivators, it is susceptible in the
Proportionably greater degree.
In a proportionably greater degree of improvement in its productive powers, whether to be derived from the accession of skill or from the application of ingenious machinery. In which particular, therefore, the labor employed in the culture of land can pretend to no advantage over the engaged in manufacture, over that engaged in manufacturers. That with regard to an augmentation of the quantity of useful labor, this excluding
adventitious
circumstances must depend essentially upon that increase of capital, which again must depend upon the savings made out of the revenues of those who furnish or manage that which is at any time employed, whether in agriculture or in manufactures or in any other way. But while the exclusive productiveness of agricultural labor has been thus denied or refuted, the superiority of its productiveness has been conceded without hesitation. As this concession involves a point of considerable magnitude in relation to maxims of public administration, the grounds on which it rests are worthy of a distant and particular examination.
I would just say quickly here that number 3 section here is like gold. That's core material right here. Because he does get across that there are 2 ways of increasing the powers of productivity of a society, right? And he's saying that the problem is everyone is only looking, mostly who are like the Adam Smith, the people who are looking at the argument that agriculture is the key to everything. They're only looking at the increase of the quantity. So you can make your land more, you can do things more productively by having more people work the land. You can make them work faster. You can make them work longer hours. That'll all have the effect of increasing the productivity, right? But it's all quantitative types of increase. But the other type, the more valuable type, is the productive powers. How do you increase the productive powers of a people? Well, that requires that you change the quality of their production, right? You give them better quality tools. You make more discoveries. You do things that are, you use better machines to till the land. But that's not something that you can necessarily get from the farmer per se. If you just have farmers, who's going to make the machines that are going to be used by the farms? Who's going to make the tractors, right? So that's being left out of the equation. So just to say that those are the two big ideas.
And to go back to what LaRouche was saying in his paper, is the 1987 defense of Hamilton, talking about the rate of production of useful things in society, but he's also talking about the rate of change. So it's not just about the rate of change, how much change you can have, like you said, like we could increase production of stuff. Okay, we make a different machine, or we get more employees, so we have more production, but also the rate of change. So what you said about the increase in technology, that's exactly it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think in physics it's called velocity and acceleration. It's when the change in velocity is called acceleration. Kind of interesting.
Yeah. That's a nice way to think about it. That's good.
Does that mean you're going to work faster?
Yeah, you're gonna change you're gonna change how fast you're working. And so instead of it's like when you're in a car. That's why it's called the accelerator. The gas pedal is called the accelerator. It makes you go faster than you're going now.
And yet velocity, how you're thinking about it is, could you define velocity from the standpoint of how you?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, so you have velocity is the change with position with respect to time, and then the acceleration is the change with velocity with respect to time, which is your change in position with respect to time with respect to time.
That's a fun idea. That's a fun idea.
Yeah.
That's good. Good.
Yeah. So where were we? One of the arguments? Okay. One of the arguments made use of in support of the idea may be pronounced both quaint and superficial. It amounts to this, that the productions of the soil, nature cooperates with man, and that the effect of their joint labor must be greater than that the labor of man alone. This, however, is far from being a necessity inference. It is very conceivable that the labor of man alone, laid out upon a work requiring great skill and art to bring it to perfection, may be more productive in value than the labor of nature and man combined, when directed toward more simple operations and objects. And when it is recollected to what an extent the agency of nature and the application of the mechanical powers is made auxiliary to the prosecution of manufacturers, the suggestion, which has been noticed, loses even the appearance of plausibility. It might also be observed with a contrary view that the labor employed in agriculture is in a great measure periodical and occasional, depending on seasons, liable to various and non-intermissions, while that occupied in many manufacturers is constant and regular, extending through the year, embracing some instances night as well as day. It is also probable that there are among the cultivators of land more examples of remissness than among artificers. The farmer, from the peculiar fertility of his land, or some other favorable circumstance, may frequently obtain a livelihood, even with a considerable degree of carelessness in the mode of cultivation. But the artisan can, with difficulty, effect the same object without exerting himself pretty equally with all those who are engaged in the same pursuit.
When they say, for those who speak French, they're probably going to be the most useful. Remissness. Is that the same thing as like laziness or something, or carelessness? Am I right to say that? Or
I think it's just time that you are not working. Basically, you have latency, like, season to season. Like, you can plant, you can harvest, but eventually, you have a season off. I think that's, but I'm not sure exactly of the word.
No, exactly. The French word for that is la mise en jachère.
la mise en jachère?
Oui, J-A-C-H-E accent grave R-E. Okay, and it's exactly what Pascal just explained. Okay, because in ancient times, because people were perfectly aware that they don't want to exhaust the mineral richness of a land, they would let that land be in not to use that land for a year and use it next year, okay, in order for the mineral richness to renew itself, if you want, not to be exhausted.
Right. You can think the closest word to that would be remission. So, like, the way we use it nowadays is usually in terms of medical, cancer.
Yeah.
So when you're in remission, it means it's no longer an active part, like you're not under threat, right? But it can be seen as a latency, or you're without the cancer at that point. So it's a period of without work, without something.
But then there's another
Not being
definition being that Declan just found of the quality of being lax and neglectful. Laxity, laxness, slackness. So
Okay.
I suspect that in the context of what he's saying, because he's sort of using both, it's sort of occurring in an idea that he's unfolding, where he's both referring to the cons of agriculture being something, as you guys pointed out, is periodic, seasonal. You have to stop it occasionally. It's not constant. Whereas industrial production can be done all day, all night if you want, all seasons of the year. But then he also says that you can tolerate a degree of carelessness in the mode of cultivation of agriculture, after he talks about remissness. Whereas you can't be as careless if you're operating machinery. You might lose your fingers, I think, is what
Yes.
he's thinking about.
Yes. Well, yeah. It's not the same consequence coming from your carelessness.
Yeah.
I just want to add, like, as an artisan, that's how I take an artificer, or like as an artisan, and being that you'd have, when you're making something, you're actually learning as you're making. And so, like, your brain is constantly occupied, like, how can I do my job better? How can I do my job better? Where maybe, like, when you're a farmer, it's like you just it doesn't take much. I should say it doesn't take a lot of skill to farm, but it's more of a tradition thing. You do what Uncle Joe did, and there's no need to make yourself better than your neighbor, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, there's definitely. Oh yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, I was simply going to say that the political resistance from the oligarchy, that's true. But at the same time, I think that Kelly has a point, in the sense that it was also a moment of history that most of the people on Earth were farmers. Okay, so it took a certain evolution of a mentality to go to the next step, if you want. It reminds me of the Luddites, those people who destroyed the machines because they didn't want to lose their job because of the machines.
Right.
Luddites, eh?
Yeah, Luddites. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for sure. Like the farmer, which takes great skill to be a farmer, but in those days as well, if a farmer lived in a culture that didn't have kilns, that didn't have, because who's going to make the metal work? Who's going to shape your work? The forgers. Who is going to produce the equipment, right? If you don't live in a world where the farmer's not going to do that themselves, they'll use what exists and what they can buy to work their land. But there are fewer opportunities for them to improve the quality of their production by introducing new technologies. You just can't do it without having also access to industrial workers that you can have communion with. So yeah, I think you're right, Kelly, in that sense. If you don't have that, it's easier just to like go with the flow with what your grandparents did and not really change your way of doing things for a longer time.
But
Yeah,
don't
so-
forget, we are talking about in this period. This is literally at, let's see, Diocletian, I think. He was the Roman emperor who set these edicts that you were basically trapped in
Mhm.
whatever you were born into. If you were a farmer, you were a farmer, and your grandchildren are going to be a farmer, and your great 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 grandchildren, you're
Mhm.
stuck in that. So that was the condition of Europe for God, how many centuries?
Long time.
Long
Well,
time.
maybe
But this
10 centuries before the Renaissance.
Mhm.
This
Right,
is
so
this is America. This is the land where you can pursue your happiness.
Yes, but it took aristocratic men to be at the helm of that big project.
well, don't forget. I mean, as Graham found out, the Saugus Iron Works, that was the leading iron manufacturer in the world.
Mhm. Mhm.
Where
Mm.
was that?
Like I said, Massachusetts, it's kind of northwest of Boston.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
And when the Mathers or the Winthrops set it up, it was the leading iron manufacturer in the world.
Yep.
That's in the 1790s.
Way before that, like 1690s.
Yeah.
Even before that, even.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. The British didn't like that. Yeah, it took them a long time to crush that. But that's
Yeah.
that's what Hamilton is tapping into as far as it didn't originate with Hamilton. It didn't even originate with Ben Franklin. This idea was growing and growing from the original 1640s Massachusetts Bay Colony, as it took the best traditions of economic thinking from Europe. And people like Winthrop, the Mathers were leaders of this. They were in communication with people like Gottfried Leibniz as well. John Winthrop Jr. was, at least. So
Hey Matt,
yeah.
I put the camera, like this cameraless skull picture in the chat thing. How do we?
Well, by the end, I'm gonna play it. I'm gonna open it when we're done the reading.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, why would Hamilton write this report like at this time? Like, why is it so important to discuss this?
That's a good question. Pascal, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think that what he's quoting, Adam Smith, was also something which was an influence on the not exactly all the founding fathers, but you could see it much more on the side of Jefferson. And at that point, it's General Washington. Washington is the president when Hamilton is writing these reports. He's submitting them to Congress, but he's also in a sense, he's organizing also the presidency around this new conception, because you can really say like there's a tradition, but it's really like what he's bringing forward, this idea of the power of labor. It hasn't really been taught or discussed like that ever. So he's really bringing something new, and it's in really this idea of that we're going to create a new system. The United States, as a constitutional republic, is going to be, like a laboratory to bring forth like new and better conceptions of what mankind can be. And so really like that's what he's trying to do. But on the other side, you have agrarians. You have people that say, well, we're pretty good, we make cotton, we have slaves. So what, we don't really need manufacturers. Everybody needs to eat. So let's just do what everybody needs to do, and it's going to be fine. We're just going to sell our surplus on the market, and that's how we're going to make big bucks. So other people, like Hamilton is really the leader of one side, and you have the others who are kind of like following the British agrarian type system.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit like nowadays. I think certain country in the third world has been trapped into monoculture for that from that kind of reasoning precisely. So 2 centuries later, we have the same problem. How strange.
Well, the American system is not taught anymore. Huh?
No, that's the problem.
Mm.
And I mean, the unfortunate thing is that the school of the slave owners and the agrarians who ended up, really consolidating their power in the Deep South, they gave the critical race theorists of our modern age a lot to work with. So, when you have a lot of the attacks and the self-hate that's being cultivated in Americans, especially young people, over what was America all about, they're only focusing on those people who were like they're pretending the Jeffersonians and the Adam Smithites and the people who supported the growth of the slave economy were all there is. They just reject the opposing current as if it never even existed. Which then again, it gives a lot of fuel and kindling to those who say, oh, but the US is built on hypocrisy, slavery. And Jefferson, I'm sorry, like he might have done good things at different points of his life, but when it came down to really like making some serious decisions using your political power as the presidency, it's undeniable that he massively expanded the power of the slave interests and didn't even let he was the biggest slave owner, the second biggest slave owner in Virginia, and never let his slaves go free even after he died. At least you could say George Washington, yeah, he had slaves too, but he made it very clear in his will, at the very least, they all go free as soon as I'm dead. And he treated them very well. Jefferson, impregnated them and didn't even like let the mother of his own children go free. Like, I mean, it says something about your character, and the whole economic system that came about afterwards was a real problematic thing. And despite that, Hamilton supported Jefferson. When it came down to a real fight between Burr versus Jefferson, Hamilton gave it his all to make sure Jefferson became the president, which again is a nice irony for people who think that Hamilton is just a Rothschild stooge traitor for big bankers in London, It's like, well, why did he do that?
All right. Oh yeah, but it is. Okay. But it is not meant to lay stress at the observation of this nature. They ought only to serve as a counterbalance to those of a similar complexion. Circumstances so vague in general, as well as so abstract, can afford little instruction in a matter of this kind. Another, and that which seems to be the principal argument offered for the superior productiveness of agricultural labor, turns upon the allegation that labor employed in manufacturers yields nothing equivalent to the rent of land, or to that net surplus, as it is called, which accrues to the proprietor of the soil. But this distinction, important as it has been deemed, appears rather verbal than substantial. It is easily discernible that what in the first instance is divided into 2 parts under the denominations of ordinary profit of the stock of the farmer and rent to the landlord, is in the second instance united under the general appellation of ordinary profit on the stock of the undertaker, and that this formal or verbal distribution constitutes the whole difference in the 2 cases. It seems to have been overlooked that the land is itself a stock or capital, advanced or lent by its owner to the occupier or tenant, and that the rent he receives is only the ordinary profit of a certain stock and land, not managed by the proprietor himself, but by another to whom he lends or lets it, and who on his part advances the second capital to stock and improve the land, upon which he also receives the usual profit. The rent of the landlord and the profit of the farmer are therefore nothing more than the ordinary profits of two capitals belonging to two different persons, and united in the cultivation of a farm. As in the other cases, the surplus which arises upon a manufactory, after replacing the expenses of carrying it on, answers to the ordinary profits of one or more capitals engaged in the prosecution of such manufactory. It is said one or more capitals, because in fact the same thing which is contemplated in the case of the farm sometimes happens in that of a manufactory. There is one who furnishes a part of the capital, or lends lends a part of the money by which it is carried on, and another who carries it on with the addition of his own capital. Out of the surplus which remains after defraying the expenses, an interest is paid to the money lender for the portion of the capital furnished by him, which exactly agrees the rent paid to the landlord, and the residue of that surplus constitutes the profit of the undertaker or manufacturer, and agrees with what is denominated the ordinary profits on the stock of the farmer. Both together make the ordinary profits of two capitals employed in a manufactory, as in the other case, the rent of the landlord, the revenue of the farmer, compose the ordinary profits of two capitals employed in the cultivation of a farm.
Okay, are you guys able to follow the gist of the sophistry he's addressing here?
No. Is
Okay.
there any way you can like sum that up?
Yeah, just quickly, from what I'm gathering out of it, and keep in mind, I'm not able to follow exactly what he's saying, but what I gather from this is he's saying there's a sophistry, a fallacious line of reasoning, which is trying to paint the idea that the agriculturer is more profitable than the manufacturer, because the agriculturer produces value in the form of the surplus of the land, right? The production of the land, as well as the rents extracted. So you sell the production of the land, you make money. And then on top of that, there's rents that the farmers pay to those who own the land that they're working. That's more money. So all of that is put on balance sheets, accounting as overall profit of the system. And he's saying, well, those people are making the argument that in the case of the manufacturer, you don't have all of that. You only have savings, you have what you produce, but what you produce is not really more than what you started with. And they're making these arguments that are denying. He's like, if you look at it, in the case of manufacturing, you also have profits from the workers, but also you have an owner of a factory, and you might have the owner who's receiving a loan from a moneylender. They're paying interest rates to the moneylender for the use of the money. They might own a variety of factories that different sub owners then are managing and then extracting wealth out of. So you have this. He's basically just saying you've got a brushing over of the reality that on the one hand, the agriculture is more productive than they actually are, because the only thing that has real value is what's being produced. The rents don't really have the real value. It's a bit of a mathematical aberration. So it's making it seem like it's bigger than it is. And on the other hand, if you want to play that game, you could apply that logic to industry and find the same thing anyway. There's rents being paid as well as surplus production, as well as money lending as well. So you could play the mathematical game and find the same equivalency in both cases. So there's a sophistry. That seems to be what he's doing.
You
I
almost
guess
think
the
that
modern equivalent would be these stupid ads for passive income.
What do you mean?
I don't know. You see all the ads on YouTube all the time talking about using the income off of Amazon as passive income.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, exactly. You can make a little, they're basically creating little pyramid schemes or little ways for you to create operations that don't produce real value, but you can make money, and then make Joe Biden can get on TV and say, look, we've got this money in circulation. We have an economic boom, even though people are, creating mass suicide. We've lost 2 years of life and the economy shutting down, but you could ignore that. Yeah, I mean, it's fudging data.
Yep. But of course, LaRouche brought this up right in the debate with Abelerna over this issue of the parasitical nature of these rentier financiers.
Yeah, right. That's a good one. Forgot about that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And of course, in history, these tenant farmers who had to basically give most of their produce over to the landlords with barely enough basically to keep alive. So.
Yeah.
Well, historically, when the landlords were warriors that defended your persons against the barbarians, I would say that it was a good system, okay? Because those people were doing a true job by fighting the barbarians.
Mm-hmm.
But 5 or 6 or 8 centuries later, when the barbarians disappear and became the princes morphed themselves into the barbarians, extracting the rent precisely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it became a mafia racket, a protection racket.
Yes, but at the beginning, it was a deal.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Declan, did you want to throw something out there?
Yeah, I was just thinking that when you think about it, they're saying so they're pointing out, well, the farmers are making up more profit because there's more, they're doing more operations. But when you think about it, a manufacturer employs more accountants ultimately. He's going to have to pay all of his guys and stuff like that. There's a lot more math to run a financial math to run a factory than to run a farm.
As well as, yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So the rent there. So should I continue?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The rent, therefore, accruing to the proprietor of the land, far from being a criterion of exclusive productiveness, as has been argued, is no criterion even to the superior productiveness. The question must still be whether the surplus, after defraying expenses of a given capital employed in the purchase and improvement of a piece of land, is greater or less than that of a like capital employed in the prosecution of a manufactory, or whether the whole value produced from a given capital and a given quantity of labor employed in one way be greater or less than the whole value produced from a equal capital and an equal quantity of labor employed in the other way, or rather, perhaps, whether the business of agriculture or that of manufacturers will lead to the greatest product according to the compound ratio of the quantity of the capital and the quantity of labor, which are employed in the one or in the other. The solution of either of these questions is not easy. It involves numerous and complicated details, depending on accurate knowledge of the objects to be compared. It is not known that the comparison has ever yet been made upon sufficient data properly ascertained and analyzed. To be made to make it on the present occasion with satisfactory precision would demand more previous inquiry and investigation than there has been hitherto either leisure or opportunity to accomplish.
And so you get the overarching problem that he's really in some ways laying out for future generations of economists and scientists to solve, right? And I mean, he actually is going pretty far to solving it as well. But just to say, like, how do you actually, he's like, people are saying and they're repeating and then citing each other to use as proofs that agriculture is so much more profitable than manufacturing in the works of Adam Smith and other things, the physiocrats. But he's like, first of all, nobody has ever actually done a proper real study on the equivalency of the value you can get from capital invested and the labor applied within a productive manufacturing process. It's a complicated process. So nobody did the work, and you're just saying it's unproductive because you don't want it. But he's like, if people actually do the work and figure it out, well, you're probably going to find some happy surprises, or that might piss some people off too. But again, it requires that people have this sense that the powers of productivity increase both quantitatively, but more importantly, qualitatively. You have to have those two senses of growth. And if you just have the quantitative sense, you're screwed. You won't be able to differentiate the, you might actually conclude, like the Keynesians today, that it's just as profitable to make windmills and put people to work making windmills because they're going to get a paycheck versus building nuclear reactors or something actually productive, because those same quantity of workers are still going to get paychecks, and you won't be able to see the qualitative difference of the two projects. One is going to have a negative value, the other one a positive value, and you won't see it if you're a mathematician.
Yeah. I once read a book about it was like a business novel by a physicist about talking about supply chain management and how you have to keep your you don't keep people working on useless tasks just to keep them working. You have to produce something to the ends, and it has to be accurate to the order you're given, stuff like that. And so he's managing like time and constraints and stuff like that. Is really the theory of constraints. It's called. It's really interesting.
That's the name of the book?
It's called The Goal, actually, by Eli Goldratt.
Okay. I'm always looking for good fiction. The Goal by Eli. What's the last name?
Goldratt.
Okay. That's an unfortunate name. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it's required reading at Wharton school. Yeah, business school. So
Cool.
I'm pretty sure.
I'm going to find it. Cool.
Yeah.
Emphasis on war.
Paul Wharton isn't a peacemaker? I don't know that.
No, it's just a famous free trade school out of Chicago that was started by the Wall Street bastards.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Okay. Still going to read the book. All right.
All right. So, where were we? The solution?
Is that where
no, it was the next paragraph, some essays.
Right.
Yeah.
Some essays, however, have been made towards acquiring the requisite information, which have rather served to throw doubt upon than to confirm the hypotheses under examination. But it ought to be acknowledged that they have been too little diversified and are too imperfect to authorize a definitive conclusion either way, leading rather to probable conjecture than to certain deduction. They render it probable that there are various branches of manufacturers in which a given capital will yield a greater total product and a considerably greater net product than an equal capital invested in the purchase and improvement of lands, and that there are also some branches in which both the gross and the net produce will exceed that of agricultural industry, according to a compound ratio of capital and labor. But it is on this last point that there appears to be the greatest room for doubt. It is far less difficult to infer generally that the net produce of capital engaged in manufacturing enterprises is greater than that of capital engaged in agriculture. In stating these results, the purchase and improvement of lands under previous cultivation are alone contemplated. The comparison is more in favor of agriculture when it is made with reference to the settlement of new and waste lands. But an argument drawn from so temporary a circumstance could have no weight in determining the general question concerning the permanent relative productiveness of the two species of industry. How far it ought to influence the policy of the United States on the score of particular situation will be adverted to another place. The foregoing suggestions are not designed to inculcate an opinion that manufacturing industry is more productive than agriculture. They are intended rather to show that the reverse of this proposition is not ascertained, that the general arguments which are brought to establish it are not satisfactory, and consequently that the supposition of the superior productiveness of tillage ought to be no obstacle for listening to any substantial inducements to the encouragement of manufacturers, which may be otherwise perceived to exist through an apprehension that they may have a tendency to divert labor from a more to a less profitable employment. It is extremely probable on a full and accurate development of the matter, on the ground of fact and calculation, it would be discovered that there is no material difference between the aggregate productiveness of the one and the other kind of industry, and that the property of the encouragements which may in any case be proposed to be given either ought to be determined upon consideration irrelative to any comparison of that nature.
So
Hmm.
was that okay?
Yeah, that was end of point 1 actually, in at least in the book, the works of Hamilton. I don't know if you have the sections. I don't think the number 1 was written when you start reading Declan, but that's the first section, point 1. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just to get across, he's really just simply saying that, look, we're not trying to prove right now that manufacturing is necessarily better or more productive than agriculture, but anybody who has been saying the opposite has been bullshitting. They haven't actually, they've been talking out of their ass. They haven't actually proven their case at all. They've been making assertions, but they haven't proven anything. So that's what we want to establish. Don't shut your mind off to manufacturing, people. Right.
Okay. Without contending for the superior productiveness of manufacturing, yes?
Hold on. I'm just going to quickly look to see how far this goes. Okay, so we're going to read down to as to the division of labor. Okay. All right. So,
Okay,
and then we'll stop. Okay.
cool. But without contending for the superior productiveness of manufacturing industry, it may conduce to a better judgment of the policy, which ought to be pursued respecting its encouragement, to contemplate the subject under some additional aspects, tending not only to confirm the idea that this kind of industry has been improperly represented as unproductive in itself, but to evince in addition, the establishment and diffusion of manufacturers have the effect of rendering the total mass of useful and productive labor in a community greater than it would otherwise be. In prosecuting this discussion, it may be necessary briefly to resume the review of some of the topics which have already been touched. To affirm that the labor of the manufacturer is unproductive because he consumes as much as the produce of the land as he adds value to the raw materials which he manufactures is not better founded than it would be to affirm that the labor of the farmer, which furnishes materials to the manufacturer, is unproductive because he consumes an equal value of manufactured articles. Each furnishes a certain portion of the produce of his labor to the other, and each destroys a correspondent portion of the produce of the labor of the other. In the meantime, the maintenance of two citizens instead of one is going on. The state has two members instead of one, and they together consume twice the value of what is produced from the land. But instead of a farmer and artificer, if instead of a farmer and an artificer, there were a farmer only, he would be under the necessity of devoting a part of his labor to the fabrication of clothing and other articles, which he would procure for the artificer, of the artificer in the case of there being such a person. And of course, he would be able to devote less labor to the cultivation of his farm and would draw from it a proportionably less product. The whole quantity of production in this state of things is in provisions, raw materials, and manufactures would certainly not exceed the value of, in value, the amount of what would be produced in the provisions and raw materials only, if there were an artificer as well as a farmer. Again, if there were both an artificer and a farmer, the latter would be left at liberty to pursue exclusively the cultivation of his farm. A greater quantity of provisions and raw materials would of course be produced, equal at least, as has been already observed, to the whole amount of the provisions, raw materials, and manufactures which would exist on a contrary supposition. The artificer at the same time would be going on in the production of manufactured commodities to an amount sufficient not only to repay the farmer in those commodities for the provisions and materials which were procured from him, but to furnish the artificer himself with a supply of similar commodities for his own use. Thus, then, there would be two quantities or values in existence instead of one, and the revenue and consumption would be double in one case what it would be in the other.
Is that
Feels like the harmony of interests, huh?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So yeah, same baby. It just grew up a little bit more under Carrie, but it's the same baby. Yeah.
If in place of these suppositions there were supposed to be two farmers, no artificer, each of whom applied a part of his labor to the culture of land and another part to the fabrication of manufacturers, in this case, the portion of the labor of both bestowed upon land would produce the same quantity of provisions and raw materials only, as would be produced by the entire sum of the labor of one applied in the same manner, and the portion of the labor of both bestowed upon manufacturers would produce the same quantity of manufactures only, as would be produced by the entire sum of the labor of one applied in the same manner. Hence, the produce of the labor of the two farmers would be no greater than the produce of the labor of the farmer and artificer. Hence, its results that the labor of the artificer is as positively productive as that of the farmer, and as positively augments the revenue of the society.
Are people okay with that line of logic so far?
Yep.
Well, it kind of makes sense to a certain extent, but I would say I think he's going to say it. Actually, Hamilton's going to say it, but if you actually do one thing, you get better at it and you do it more successfully than if you had to split your time between like, oh, now I got to make some metal gears so that I can get my horse to plow, and something broke, so I got to fix it, and it's you have to always split your time. And
I got to make my shoes now. I got to make my kids' clothes.
Yeah. So it might be that it's split half and half, but I don't think really it's as positive as that. I think that really, like, when you're doing only one task, you can do it more fully and you can get better at it, so produce more than if you had to split your time. But I get the it's an interesting way to put it.
Thought experiment.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't know if anybody's his name is Sloan. He wrote a series of books that went through how society kind of operated back then. If you were basically an independent farmer, and somebody starting a mill, for instance, a grist mill, by building a dam. That's his name, Sloan. But he produced these good books about, like I said, about that period, about a family that was starting out by building a mill.
Okay.
So it's a good description of that time period.
If you got a link to a PDF of it on archive.org or something, send it our way. I'll make sure people get it next reading. Yeah. So it's overall, like you said, it's not necessarily as straightforward, but definitely if you got to do everything, you got to make your furniture, you got to make your utensils, you got to make your tools and your clothes and your shoes, you're definitely, as a farmer, not going to be as productive. Whereas if you have somebody doing all of these things in the city nearby you, they'll buy your food, you'll make money from them that way, and you're going to be able to have products that you don't have to make yourself, and it'll probably be better quality products because they're just focused on their craft. So they can make probably better quality cutlery and ceramics and things that you're going to put inside your house, and clothes and everything else, and tools that you'll use in the farm. So much more sustainable form of development.
Yeah, I was almost imagining like a cartoon could be made, like one of those infographics you see that or like a PragerU video.
Yeah,
That's how I was envisioning it in my head.
Me too. Yeah, you just have like the little simple animation of like one worker. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It seems like a very straightforward way to conduct the lesson. That's actually a great idea. Do you know anybody who can do that, Declan?
I don't know anybody personally, but
Okay.
I know of a guy called Seamus Coughlin of Freedom Tunes.
Yeah.
And he does a lot of really funny cartoons.
Okay.
And he's pretty good.
Yeah, we watch him. He's cool. All right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna put a talent search out. I see that Eric Sloan. That's cool. That's good.
Yeah, it's about life during that period.
Gotcha.
This family, like kids starting a mill.
Okay. Sweet.
So
Interesting.
it's useful to have like this kind of context. That's for sure.
Yep.
All right.
Continue.
The labor of the artificer replaces to the farmer that portion of his labor with which he provides the materials of exchange with the artificer, and which he would otherwise have been compelled to apply to manufacturers. And while the artificer thus enables the farmer to enlarge his stock of agricultural industry, a portion of which he purchases for his own use, he also supplies himself with the manufactured articles of which he stands in need. He still does more. Besides this equivalent, which he gives for the portion of agricultural labor consumed by him, and the supply of manufactured commodities for his own consumption, he furnishes still a surplus, which compensates for the use of the capital advanced either by himself or some other person for carrying on the business. This is the ordinary profit of the stock employed in the manufactory, and is, in every sense, as effective an addition to the income of the society as the rent of land. The produce of the labor of the artificer, consequently, may be regarded as composed of three parts: one by which the provisions for his subsistence and the materials for his work are purchased of the farmer, one by which he supplies himself with manufactured necessaries, and a third which constitutes the profit on the stock employed. The two last portions seem to have been overlooked in the system, which represents manufacturing industry as barren and unproductive. In the course of the preceding illustrations, the products, equal quantities of labor, of the labor of the farmer and artificer, have been treated as if equal to each other. But this is not to be understood as intending to assert any such precise equality. It is merely a manner of expression adopted for the sake of simplicity and perspicuity. Whether the value of the produce of the labor of the farmer be somewhat more or less than that of the artificer is not material to the main scope of the argument, which hitherto has only aimed at showing that the one, as well as the other, occasions a positive augmentation of the total produce and revenue of the society. It is now proper to proceed a step further, and to enumerate the principal circumstances from which it may be inferred that the manufacturing establishments not only occasion a positive augmentation of the produce of revenue and revenue of the society, but that they contribute essentially to rendering them greater than they could possibly be without such an establishment. These circumstances are 1. The division of labor, 2. An extension of the use of machinery, 3. Additional employment to classes of the community not ordinarily engaged in the business, 4. Promoting the immigration from foreign countries, 5. The furnishing greater scope for the diversity of talents and dispositions which discriminate men from each other, 6. The affording of the affording a more ample and various field for enterprise, 7. The creating in some instances a new and securing in all a more certain and steady demand for the surplus produce of the soil. Each of these circumstances has a considerable influence upon the total mass of industrious effort in a community. Together, they add to a degree of energy and effect which are not easily conceived. Some comments on each of them, in the order in which they have been stated, may serve to explain their importance.
Beautiful. All right. So that's the structure of the essay, or I guess it was originally probably a lecture, I would imagine, before it became a written report. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just a written report. Are these 7 points now that you get if you actually embrace an agro-industrial rather than simply agro-society? Division of labor, obviously. That's going to be the next section. And every other point, which will have a lot to unpack. So I guess we're probably going to be reading this in 3 or maybe 4 more readings, I would imagine, the way these dense ideas are going. And we'll probably have a few little side things as well to pepper the research, a few little videos that might be worth watching. And I would suggest as well, there's 2 books for people listening online that will be also linked in the description box of this video and everything by Hamilton. We're gonna, I would recommend Nancy Spanis's book, Hamilton versus Wall Street, as well as Michael Kirsch's The Problem of Credit. The problem, or on the question of the credit supply, which is another really good book. These are 2 really solid, authoritative pieces on that'll add more context to Hamilton's thinking and the practical effects of Hamilton's policies in his lifetime and thereafter. So that'll be side research projects too.
Hey, Pascal.
Yeah.
Any chance, do you have Nancy Spanis's book, Political Economy of the American Revolution?
Yeah, the pair book, I have it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you've probably had like I said, a chance to read the writings of all those various cameralist economists.
Some of them, yeah.
Okay.
It's been a while, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's just that things
has it too.
Hamilton. Well, I mean, things Hamilton talks about is a lot of them basically are included in this issue of the productivity of labor.
Mm-hmm.
It's all there in these pre-American cameralists.
Yeah.
Nancy gave us a class actually, and so did Sam. We had 2 classes for the RTF workshops. One by Nancy on Leibniz and cameralism, and the other one by Sam, also on Colbert, Vattel, and the Cameralist School. I'll put those as well. I'll send them to you as links.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yes, it's too bad everybody who attacks Hamilton never, ever reads Hamilton.
Never. I've never met a single person.
Never. Nope.
No. Oh yeah, I promised I would open up you shared a little timeline, you said, was that?
This is Cameralist School JPEG. It's over in the chat.
Oh, I got it here. This one?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. And these are all representatives who are advancing the Cameralist School.
Basically, that's all the major figures.
Oh yeah.
and the time they lived.
Ah, it's useful. That's good. Cool.
Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah. Went through there with the direct continuity to Washington. Yeah, it's good. Very cool.
Yeah, it's good to compare it, like I said, to the physiocratic school.
Yeah.
And that all came much later after, like I said, this whole wave of these cameralists.
Right.
Yeah, the reaction came later.
Yep. So, like I promised everyone, this was going to be a very advanced English lesson as well as an epistemological lesson, and Hamilton did not disappoint. You definitely feel smarter after going through this, even though you're maybe a bit more confused in some ways and a bit deficient in your own use of English language. But definitely, it's a good exercise. So yeah, let's meet again next week. We'll continue this process, and I will have this uploaded within the next 48 hours or so for anyone who wants to re-review some of this. And I think we have, for this Sunday, we have Marty Seif, who's going to do something on Ben Franklin and Isaac Newton, which should be interesting. Two opposing paradigms clashing.
Yeah, Prometheus versus I don't know.
Zeus's lackey.
No, Leporello.
Oh, Leporello, yeah, there we go. Yeah. That's good.
I think I have some homework to do.
Yeah, and you're not the only one. All right, guys. It's a pleasure. I gotta run. I'll talk to y'all in the coming days ahead. Sure, yeah.
Au revoir.
Ciao.
Good night.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.